5 years ago, I made a video called The Right Way to Use Mugwort for Lucid Dreaming, and it blew up to almost 100,000 views on YouTube, making it one of the most popular videos on Mugwort on the entire platform, as well as, to the best of my knowledge, the most popular video on how to use Mugwort specifically for lucid dreaming. That was 5 years ago. That video was made using knowledge that I gained exclusively through self-experimentation and working with Mugwort for about 7 years prior to that. And I did okay. Looking back, the information I gave is pretty good, but it's not even close to the whole picture, maybe only 1/3. And I'd like to now elaborate entirely, give you the complete guide to Mugwort, everything you need to know about Mugwort for lucid dreaming. And by the time I'm done, you will know more about Mugwort for lucid dreaming than just about anyone else. This is a new level. So, the most important thing I learned about Mugwort for lucid dreaming, and I've never heard this packaged or displayed or talked about in this way anywhere else through years and years of being on lucid dreaming forums since I was 15 years old. I'm almost 32. Traveling all over the world, staying in a mystery school where we just practiced lucid dreaming for months, living on organic farms everywhere where we had tons of herbalists around, working with Mugwort, talking about it. I don't know of anyone who knows this. Mugwort actually works on 2 pathways to help support lucid dreaming. It's not just one. It works through 2 bodily systems, and both are very vital, and both are very responsible for Mugwort's effects. And today I'm going to get into those, starting with pathway 1. And it's not just a lucid dreaming herb, it's also a diuretic, it's a nervine, which means it supports your nervous system, it's a bitter tonic, which means it helps support digestion, it's an emmenagogue, which means it helps regulate the menstrual cycle, it's antimicrobial, it has insect repellent qualities and insecticide qualities, and those qualities that are in the plant are actually things that help us have lucid dreams as well, believe it or not. And really fascinatingly, I found in some recent research that it's been studied for cancer treatment, because there are things in Mugwort they think could be used in cancer treatment because they're effective at killing cancer cells. And all of these claims I'm about to make or that I just made have scientific papers to back them up, and they will be linked in the description. So today we're going to look at Mugwort from an herbalist standpoint, an herbal alchemy standpoint, a lucid dreaming standpoint, and most importantly, a real, valid, modern scientific standpoint with lots of lab studies to support all of these claims. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, there's not a whole lot of money in lucid dreaming, and because of that, there haven't been clinical trials on lucid dreaming and Mugwort. Everything we know in those studies is not so much about Mugwort specifically, except for the cancer thing. It's about the compounds that are in Mugwort and what we know about them. So Mugwort is full of these light, volatile aromatics that the alchemists would have called the plant's spirit. And today we would call them the terpene profile. And terpenes, as many of you know, are just the compounds that give plants their particular tastes and smells. And the alchemists knew intuitively that by boiling a plant too hard or trying to extract too much from it too aggressively, you could lose some of that plant spirit. You could boil it off into the air. And they didn't know about chemicals and terpenes or molecules or anything like that. They knew it through experience, and what they found was real. So the light volatiles in Mugwort are damaged by heat, by light, by dehydration, and by long storage. They are very delicate, but they're very important to lucid dreaming when we go through pathway 1. But like I said, Mugwort has 2 pathways. But in pathway 1, the light volatiles that we're looking for are the monoterpenes like thujone, and thujone has become infamous because of its role in this drink right here. I don't know if you can read that, it's absinthe. They think thujone, that came from wormwood and ended up in absinthe recipes, was the thing that was making people go nuts and trip, and none of that's actually true. It was actually just propaganda that was used in Prohibition. But yeah, thujone has come to infamy because primarily absinthe. And thujone is not just in wormwood, it's in mugwort. In fact, thujone, I believe, is in most, if not all, of the Artemisia family. Mugwort is Artemisia vulgaris. So I have some notes here. Thujone modulates GABA A receptors. That's very important to lucid dreaming. It does so by disinhibiting the GABA system. So that basically means that thujone is known to just take the brakes off a little bit. It doesn't step on the gas, it just takes off the brakes. So GABA is very important to dreaming because without it, you can't really sleep. I'll do my best to explain. GABA is a molecule in our brain that when we sleep, it's used to shut the waking world off so that the dream world can come online. And if you loosen it up just a little bit, you can still sleep and dream, but you can kind of break its grip on you enough to maybe become lucid and realize that you are dreaming without waking up entirely. The next terpene in mugwort we're going to talk about is called camphor. And one of the things camphor is known to do is stimulate the nervous system, which is also something thujone does. But if you want to experience what camphor is like, you can just smell some Vicks, and you know that like whoa feeling you get from smelling Vicks that kind of wakes you up, makes you alert. Well, that's done through stimulation of the trigeminal nerve, which is the big nerve in our face. It detects heat and cold. It basically lets our body know there are things in the air we might be breathing in. And the reason you go like, whoa, is your body is responding to a signal and it's trying to protect itself. It's not saying this is poison, it's saying there's something in the air, could be harmful, pay attention. Now, obviously, this is not going to work through a tea or through smoking so much. I think the reason this terpene works is when people use mugwort in dream pillows, which is when you take a little bag like this and you fill it with mugwort. One of the most common things I get feedback on is people saying mugwort doesn't work. When I see people with dream pillows, a lot of them, in fact, I'd say most of them, are just using dry, bulk, store-bought herbs in a little case like this and putting it under their pillow to sleep. That's not going to work at all. It needs to be fresh mugwort that's been picked and still has that mugworty smell and all those volatile terpenes in the air. And if you're sleeping and you smell some Vicks, you think, that might rouse someone a little bit. It's probably not going to wake them up right away, but it might give a little signal. And that trigeminal nerve stimulation tells the brain, hey, the body might need a little attention. There might be something in the air. So I think the camphor terpene can be useful in dream pillows if the mugwort is fresh and those terpenes are in the air. And we'll talk a little bit more about dream pillows in a second. The next terpene that I think is very important in mugwort for lucid dreaming is called borneol or borneone. And it's known as an orifice opener. And it helps things enter the blood-brain barrier or cross the blood-brain barrier. And I do have a paper linked in the description all about borneol and borneone and its potential implications in medicine for helping deliver other compounds into the brain via the blood by making the blood-brain barrier more permeable. So there's something, a word I heard used back when I was in California working in a lab. They called it the entourage effect. And basically the idea was that one compound might be powerful on its own, but it's much more powerful when it has other things working together with it. That creates the entourage effect. And all these things become more than the sum of their parts. So I think borneol is helping assist all the other terpenes enter the brain, and it's part of this entourage effect that I'm describing here. Borneol is also a mild sedative, and it helps reduce anxiety, which is important for lucid dreaming. So it's not just helping other things cross the blood-brain barrier, it actually has its own uses that support lucid dreaming directly all on its own. Now, thujone gets a lot of the credit in mugwort by the few people who even know that it might be affecting lucid dreaming. But I don't think it's my favorite one. In fact, I'm not sure that it's doing the heavy lifting here. I think that might be cineol. And cineol, also known as eucalyptol, it increases acetylcholine activity in the brain. And acetylcholine is what you could call the awareness molecule. So when we are asleep and our bodies shut off to the outside world and we're not aware, we're just kind of zombies, right? We hit REM sleep and acetylcholine spikes. And now we become aware of our inner world and our brain wakes up to experience itself and we experience dreaming. Cineol is an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor. So acetylcholine has an enemy, and that is acetylcholine esterase. It's an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. And cineol helps prevent that breakdown of acetylcholine by inhibiting acetylcholine esterase. And that is very important to lucid dreaming. And I can give you a specific example at the end of the video when we get into Mugwort's second pathway, because I've experienced firsthand by taking a prescription Alzheimer's medication the effects of limiting acetylcholine esterase. And it really is like the magic bullet of lucid dreaming. But we'll save that for the end. And don't take Alzheimer's medication. I'm given information on how a natural plant that you can find growing around your neighborhood works the same way. The other thing cineol does is increase cortical activity, or activity in the cortex of the brain. So you are aware because of the acetylcholine, but the cortex gives you the feeling of identity. And both of those things are important to who we are. So we are aware that we are us and ourselves in a dream, but only so much. Dreams are dreamy, they're weird. You see flying cars or talking pigs or whatever it is you're dreaming about, and you kind of just accept it. But imagine if you became aware a little bit more. You might think, this is strange. I must be dreaming. And then you have a lucid dream. The problem that most people have when they're learning lucid dreaming is they get way too excited. And they think, oh, I must be dreaming. And then they get excited and they wake up. Mugwort has many compounds in it that have quite contradictory uses and effects. And I think it might be this contrast that's really helping Mugwort facilitate lucid dreaming, because it's got sedative properties and also stimulant properties. It keeps you somewhere in between passive dreaming and full wakefulness. It keeps you right in that lucidity point. So those are some of the many terpenes that are in Mugwort, and the ones that are thought to have effects on lucid dreaming, not because of clinical studies on lucid dreaming, but because of studies on these one specific terpenes at a time that are found in Mugwort. Unfortunately, there are no studies like this on lucid dreaming. So if you're like a college kid working on your thesis or trying to get a PhD or something, and you want to do some dream lab experiments with me, please reach out. So all of these terpenes I just listed as part of Dream Engine 1 in Mugwort are monoterpenes. And mono, of course, means one, and terpenes are the things that give give plants their smells and flavors. So of course, monoterpene means one pair of terpenes, or a pair of isoprenes, which are hemiprenes. So they're one thing that's actually made up of two things, which is made up of two equal like half things, and they add up to 10 carbons, and it's all very ridiculous naming, and it's not really important to lucid dreaming, but I've learned about it when I was researching this, and I thought it was funny. Yeah, very, very intuitive stuff we're talking about. But this is something you do need to know about terpenes, so specifically monoterpenes in Mugwort for lucid dreaming. Monoterpenes are very small, lightweight, volatile, unstable molecules that do not stand up to heat or light or dehydration or sitting on a shelf in an herb store for years, aging. That is the spirit leaving the plant almost entirely. This barely smells like Mugwort at all. This smells mostly like a kind of a woody, slightly plant-like, maybe one time it was green smell. Dried bulk herbs from the herb store are to nature what gas station sushi is to Japan. They are picked most likely at the wrong time, improperly handled, stored in who knows how long, what type of conditions. Not good. And they also leave all the stems in because it drives up the weight and they can sell more. So I have a love-hate relationship with herbs from the herb store. So now we're going to talk about the methods for how it's possible to partake of these terpenes that are active in Mugwort's first dreaming pathway. And we're going back to the dream pillow method here. I might have mentioned before, a lot of the times I see people with dream pillows, they're using dry herbs in the pillow. That's not going to work. It needs to be fresh mugwort that still has all of these volatiles active in it. And I used to think that was just superstition, that merely smelling mugwort would increase your chances of lucidity or increase dream activity. But I know for a fact it's true from firsthand experience, because one time I went out and I wildcrafted so much mugwort, like 4 to 7 shopping bags full. And I came home with all this fresh mugwort and was really tired. I talked about it in my first video. And I just put it in my room and went to bed. And my whole room reeked, and I had the craziest dreams, as if I'd been drinking tea and smoking mugwort all day. And it turns out that I actually was ingesting these terpenes through the air. By breathing them in, they get into our bloodstream and they cross the blood-brain barrier. So a dream pillow with a lot of active volatiles in it is kind of like a long, slow, natural vape. It's these inhalable compounds dissipating into the air, and you're breathing them all night and truly ingesting them and getting them into your brain. It's very incredible, if you ask me. Now, another way that it is possible to ingest these volatiles from fresh mugwort is through smoking. And you might be thinking, well, if heat destroys them, how is smoking going to work? And I will draw you a quick diagram here with this quill that I'm actually using on camera, not faking it for the camera, actually writing with a real quill. This image of a cigarette. When you're burning something, the volatiles are cooking off and they're being destroyed. And this is way too hot. And right here, this is ambient room temperature. This is no hotter than anything I'm about to pick up, for an example, like this quill again. But somewhere in between, you have this heat gradient where between the ambient temperature and the actual literal fire, you have somewhere that's an effective vaporization point where these volatiles could actually be vaporized and inhaled, and it's very messy and inefficient. And I don't recommend smoking anymore, but it's possible. The other way is the classic technique almost everyone knows, and you just steep a little tea with mugwort for a few minutes and then drink it. But you can't steep it very long because they'll degrade, and you can't steep it too hot. You should do just below boiling. And that is an effective way to get some of these terpenes into the tea, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because these terpenes are known as lipophilic or fat soluble. They don't like water. They don't want to break down in water. You'd be creating more of an emulsion, which is suspended oil particles in the tea, in the water, rather than truly absorbing into the water. They'll always want to be a little separate, but you can get them that way. Another way to get the light volatiles through water extraction is in a still. I have a steam still here, and when you put water in the bottom, you put mugwort in the top, you boil it, the steam goes through the mugwort into the condenser and into the funnel, and the volatiles end up condensing in a liquid in the funnel again, because they've hitched a ride on the vapor trail, but they're still not actually being extracted by the water, like truly. They're more like just catching a ride with the water. And I can prove how little volatiles are in store-bought mugwort using this still. Whoops, where'd they go? This is a mugwort hydrosol I made using store-bought dried mugwort. Do you see how clear it is? You see there's no oil layer. There's not like a sheen on top. It just looks like water. Well, if the oils were in here, they'd be creating more of an emulsion, which would be cloudy. And I can show you how little oils are on here by shaking it. You see how it gets cloudy for a second and dissipates really quick? That's because there's only that much volatiles in the hydrosol. It's hardly any, because I use dried mugwort. If I'd use fresh mugwort, that hydrosol would look a lot more like this. See how it's cloudy? I'll give you a side by side. See the difference? This is from juniper, which of course it's a different plant, but I'm using it for demonstration purposes because the juniper I distilled in that still was fresh. And if I shake it, it gets even cloudier, and the cloudiness hangs out for a much longer time. This same type of effect would be happening with mugwort if the mugwort I had distilled was fresh. There's a problem with all these methods I just gave you. Storage. If you pick mugwort in the summer and you want effective light volatile terpenes to be preserved through the winter so you can participate or enjoy in mugwort use in the winter, a dream pillow will not work because very quickly they're going to turn into dry herb store herbs. Hydrosol does not last forever. Tea will not work. Smoking will not work because that's just rolling up this stuff. But like I said, they're lipophilic, and this fills me with joy to know. The terpenes want to be extracted through fat. They love fat. They're fat soluble. So you could do an oil infusion, and they will last much longer that way. To do a mugwort oil infusion, the sad thing is you can't really just put very fresh mugwort you pick that day in an olive oil bottle and shake it because the plant's still full of water, and oil and water don't mix, and oil infusions done with wet plants aren't going to be terribly shelf stable most likely. Despite mugwort's antimicrobial properties, I don't think it's a good idea to just put fresh mugwort in an olive oil bottle. I think it's a really bad idea to heat the olive oil like you're doing a culinary infusion. The best way is to dry the mugwort until it's just dry enough to get the water out of, but still smells like real mugwort. Like maybe you could get that done naturally. Don't put it in a dehydrator. Just let it dry gently and naturally, hang it up somewhere, or lay out just the leaves and not the stems flat on a sheet over a towel or something. And then stuff it in the olive oil. Don't use heat, just let it sit in there for like a month and shake it occasionally. And then you could strain it out, and you'll have captured volatile terpenes and preserved them better than any other method I know of. And typically with mugwort infusions in oil, they're not ingested, they're transdermal. So you'd rub them on your skin, temples, third eye, those are popular. But the most absorbent skin is on your hands and feet. And if you want to test that with another fun little lab test, just cut up an onion and stick it to the bottom of your foot for a while until you can taste onions in your mouth, because the onion's getting into your bloodstream through your foot. So, transdermal oil is a viable method. The other way you could do it is through tincturing and alcohol. So what you would do is take some lightly dried mugwort that has just enough of the water removed and put it in a jar, and then fill that up with alcohol, using as high proof clear alcohol as you can. You could probably also use some absinthe if you don't mind the fact that it's not going to be completely pure. But then you shake it up every day and you let it sit there and extract for about 40 days. That's 1 alchemical month, and it will extract all the lipophilic properties as well as the heavier compounds we're going to talk about in the next section of the video when we get into mugwort's second pathway for how it helps us achieve lucid dreaming and more vivid dreams. So that was all about pathway 1. But like I said, mugwort has 2 pathways, and this was the thing I was most excited to understand because it's the thing I've literally never heard. Pathway 2 does not work through monoterpenes, it works through sesquiterpene lactones. That's one of the components of pathway 2 is sesquiterpene lactones. Now there's that word again. It's not mono, it's sesqua. So mono means 1, sesqua means 1.5. Terpenes being the thing that gives plants their smell, and lactone means a ring-shaped molecule. So sesquiterpene lactone is really simple. It's just a 15 carbon terpene with a lactone ring, also known as a self-closing or cyclical ester, which again, I am not a chemist. I just think it's funny. All these words, but yeah, they don't really mean anything to us as lucid dreamers. What's most important is knowing that sesquiterpene lactones are heavy, and shelf stable and they survive heat very well. So there's tons of them still left in this crappy herb store mugwort, which is why my method of decoction that I gave in the first video, making a concentrated tea, is actually effective. It will work on fresh mugwort or dried mugwort. The thing about dried mugwort is it's the only thing worth doing to it, because anything you would get from light steeping is already gone. You have to decoct dry mugwort if you want to get anything valuable out of it whatsoever, for the most part. I mean, I say for the most part because let's say you decoct fresh mugwort, you're going to cook off most of the light volatiles, but you keep a covered lid on it. Some of them are going to redissolve back into the water, and it's going to be small, probably negligible, but let's go back to the entourage effect. Fresh mugwort always works, pretty much in my experience, no matter how you process it. But dried mugwort only works in one way that I know of, and that's through very aggressive extraction methods like decoction. This is actually a decoction I have here that I made in this still unintentionally. I was trying to do steam distillation and I succeeded in that, and I got, you know, these little bottles of hydrosol. This is the last cut of the run. It's got almost nothing in it. All the best stuff I already consumed, but it was made from dried mugwort, so it had almost no effect whatsoever. But once the mugwort in here got waterlogged, it kind of plugged up the vapor pathway, and you start to get what's called refluxing, or basically just the condensation falling from the biomass flask down into the boiling flask, and you're just recycling the same vapor, boiling it more and more, but with the mugwort in it. The mugwort mostly up here, but some that had fallen into the boiler, and that went until it turned black like coffee. And there's going to be a lot of sesquiterpene lactones in here, and sesquiterpene lactones are the backbone of mugwort's properties as what's known as a bitter tonic. And bitter tonics are one of the most prolific medicines in herbal remedies. And the thing that's so amazing about them is they work through taste alone. They can trigger an incredible, like, domino effect in your body simply by tasting them. I'll actually take a little now because I like the effects. But we have over 25 taste receptors that are dedicated just to bitter on our tongue, making it by far the most diverse group of taste receptors on our tongue and the most diverse way of tasting anything at all. Now, for the second most diverse is sour, and that only uses 3 channels for detecting sour. Sugar or sweet is only 2. When you take a bitter medicine, these sesquiterpene lactones are insecticides or insect repellents to protect the plant. When we taste them, they taste bitter, they activate these receptors in our tongue, and they tell our body, oh crap, the brain is an idiot and just decided to swallow poison that tasted like poison. So it activates your vagus nerve, puts your body into rest and digest modes, and makes you chill out. That's very important to rest and sleep, and in turn lucid dreaming. It makes it more of a sedative. You don't get that from steeping mugwort lightly or anything in pathway 1. You only get it through aggressive extraction like decoction, which is more valuable in mugwort's second pathway to lucid dreaming. And that's not even the best part. That's just something I think is helpful and also incredible, that taste alone can trigger this response in our body. Now, the reason other bitter things are not medicinal, like let's say dark coffee or dark chocolate or beer, is because although they do trigger those taste receptors and they would trigger that vagus nerve, that switch is actually overridden by other things that are brought along in other types of food. So in coffee, you have the caffeine, and that overrides the parasympathetic response. In beer, you have the alcohol that also overrides it. And in something like dark chocolate, the sugar actually activates the reward system more powerfully than the poison response. So only some herbs are bitter medicine, some things that are not poisonous to us in a medicinal dose that will trigger this response and then not be overridden by other things that they bring along with them, like sugar, caffeine, alcohol. So that magical component, sesquiterpene lactones, is basically just a fancy way of saying mugwort tastes really bad. And they're found in the entire Artemisia family. Pretty much any bitter herb is going to have sesquiterpene lactones setting off this bodily response and chilling you out. But they're not the only thing in pathway 2. There's also phenolic compounds, flavonoids, which are a form of phenolic compounds. And that's where some more incredible stuff is happening here with mugwort. So some of the phenolics in mugwort are neuroprotective. They support REM sleep. They also contain an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor, like I mentioned in pathway 1. So that happens in both pathways with mugwort. The thing that wants to erase the acetylcholine in our brain is inhibited by the phenolics in mugwort, as well as some of the monoterpenes in mugwort. And I mentioned I was going to tell you this story. So when I was in Guatemala studying at the mystery school and practicing lucid dreaming, I met this Canadian guy, and he asked me if I'd heard of galantamine, which is an Alzheimer's medication that's prescription only. But he managed to get his hands on some because apparently at one time in Canada, even though it was still prescription, it was easy to find some places, OTC. So he brought some to Guatemala, and he's like, oh yeah, this stuff's incredible. And it's true. It is like the magic bullet of lucid dreaming. And I took some. It's a stimulant, so I took a little bit, not a whole one, or else you won't be able to fall back asleep. I did the wake back to bed method. So I went to sleep normally, had some dreams, whatever, woke up, took, I think, a half of a galantamine and went back to bed and had the most vivid dreams and the most incredible dream recall, as if my dreams were my waking life, as if it was a day I actually lived. And that's because it had inhibited the acetylcholine esterase, which is the thing that makes us forget our dreams when that enzyme comes in. And I was lucid through that whole morning that I was dreaming on galantamine. So the same thing galantamine does, mugwort can do to us as well. And it does it naturally, it does it much more gently, but it still works quite well. And there are other ways of doing this with herbs that I will talk about in other videos, because mugwort is not the most powerful way to do this, but it's just one of the ways that exist. So, like I mentioned, the second pathways of mugwort, most of that is not done by crossing the blood-brain barrier. Most of these molecules in the heavier or bitter fraction, as we would call it in alchemy, are too big to cross the blood-brain barrier. They affect our bodies directly, rather than affecting our brains. And by affecting our bodies, they can affect our brains, except, of course, like I mentioned, the acetylcholine esterase inhibitor, which you can get through certain phenolics that you can find in mugwort. So as far as my first video was concerned, the right way to use mugwort for lucid dreaming, what's all this mean? Well, I wasn't exactly wrong in that video. I came to that conclusion that the best way to use mugwort was through decoction, and I did that with fresh as well as dried mugwort. And I think my findings there were reinforced largely by my occasional use of store-bought mugwort, which only works through decoction. And decocting fresh mugwort does still work very well. But does it work the best that it possibly can? Well, no, of course not, because you're undercutting most of pathway 1 by boiling off the spirit of the plant or those light volatiles. Even though a lot of them will still redissolve into the decoction, it's, like I said, fairly negligible. So I think the most effective route that I haven't had the chance to experiment with, because there's no mugwort growing for me to go harvest right now, is probably to decoct mugwort and then right at the end throw a little bit of fresh mugwort in to steep quickly, and don't let it boil off the monoterpenes. Another way might be to decoct mugwort and then use a little transdermal mugwort oil infusion. Another way could be when I go out and wildcraft 10 bags of mugwort at once, decoct some, drink some, and then go sleep in my room with all my mugwort drying in it, and do it through a dream incubation chamber rather than just one little dream pillow. these are ideas I have that I haven't had the chance to use yet or experiment or put into place yet because it's covered in snow out there. But I will say, if you're going to make a mugwort tea, you can't get both worlds at the same time. You cannot get both worlds from dry store-bought mugwort, and you cannot get both worlds truly by decocting fresh mugwort unless you throw a little fresh mugwort in right at the end to act as a normal traditional 5-minute tea steeping under the boiling point of the water. Hope that was fun for you. I hope you learned a lot, because mugwort is an entire pharmacy and an herb. We only covered the lucid dreaming stuff today. I also said it's an emmenagogue, which means it helps with the menstrual cycle. And as I've been doing this research and as I've been experimenting with mugwort, my girlfriend has joined me in that. And she had started her menstrual cycle last week. And she said, I told her, I'm like, oh, this is an emmenagogue? And she goes, that's funny you say that, because this cycle has been way gentler than all my last previous cycles that I can remember. This one's been markedly better. So I'd like to do a whole video on mugwort and how it works there. It's also an antimicrobial, an insect repellent, a diuretic, a nervine, a bitter tonic, and it has been studied recently for potential use as a cancer treatment. So this plant is incredibly benevolent. She grows all around us, all over the world, probably near you. And most people think she's just a little weed that they walk past and they don't even notice. So very grateful to this herb, and thanks for joining me in this study here. And subscribe if you want to see me do more of this type of thing. Like I said, all of the evidence to support all these claims are in the description with real scientific studies that have been done and published. All right, have a good night.